Think about sound as a laser, and then every hard surface around you is basically a mirror. Then you can kind of start shooting sound from one side across different walls back to where you are.
All right, almost Dr. Castro. So there is something that I hear almost all the time when I hear audio, which is spatial audio. That's the new trend. I mean, it's been around for a while, obviously, but like now it's becoming more of a forefront. There's music being mixed in spatial. There is spatial experiences. You see it everywhere. This is a spatial experience. I'm creating automotive spatial. I'm creating hotel experiences spatial. What does spatial even mean, and how does it work?
Yeah, so take it one step back. Spatial is one of three very important elements for anything that's relating to sound, right? There's temporal, which is time-based. There's spectral, which is the amount of detail in the sound itself, and timbral, and that's how we get that's how we know what one thing is from another. And there's also spatial, which is now telling us about a place in space, right? So spatial is the cool thing because it gives that new sense of direction, or there's movement, or something. There's positionality in the room. So if you're watching, for example, a long time ago when there was a train coming at people and they freaking the heck out, that was cool. And let's say you had one train horn just blasting at the front of it because someone was ready to press the button and they pressed the train horn. So it's really cool, but it doesn't sound like it's coming at you. So once you hear it once and you're used to the jump scare, then it's not going to be as impactful because you say, oh, but it's staying over there. No problem. Now let's say they throw the train horn as it's coming at you. It's probably going to scare you a little bit more because you see the train coming at you, and then you hear the train coming at you at the same time. You might think that the train's coming at you at that point. So spatiality is really important. That gives us an extra sense of realism in movies and songs and whatever too, right? If you listen to a band and they've been mixed spatially the way that they were recorded, then you might believe that you're actually listening to them in the way that they were recorded instead of just like, I'm listening to them on my headphones, but it's like, oh, I can actually imagine myself there in the room. So that led to stuff like multi-channel, which was the first foray into spatial audio, especially in movies, later in music. And that was cool because then you felt like you're actually in the action as stuff was happening around you. Maybe rain was falling all the way around you. Maybe there's like a taxi driving this way and then people walking that way. You could have this sense of direction and a sense of positionality within that scene, right? And that's all fine and dandy, and that's super cool. It does assume that you're at the perspective of the scene that's happening at that spot. So there are some assumptions that have to take into place in order to give it any sort of realism. And of course, that has evolved all the way to Dolby Atmos, which is a different type of spatial play. There's multi-channel, and then there's basically object-oriented audio, which sounds scary, but it basically just means that it's a virtual speaker instead of an actual speaker where it is. And then actually this is a virtual object that you can assign a sound to, and then maybe it emits something as it goes along. Just a way to get more granular control and not prescribe that this is going to come from this speaker, this is going to come from this speaker. It's just saying that there's something happening at the time, and if there's a speaker there, give it a little bit of a move it between
each of the speakers. So let's say, like, and I guess to give some context, right? In order to do something like spatial audio, don't you kind of need like a 5.1, 7.1 setup, roughly?
You need something to give you a sense of space, right? Okay. And so when people make a 5.1, 7.1, there's actually rules about like, here's where they're supposed to be, and the original strict guidelines were like, they have to be, there's a left, a center, and a right, and then there's a left surround and a right surround, and there's a left rear surround and a right rear surround, and that's your set. And the 0.1 means 0.1 sub. So 7 speakers and then 1 sub. So some people have 7.1, some people have 7.2, and yada yada.
But you still need that type of audio reproduction, right? In order to create, because I'm curious about, like, if you're doing something like object-based, like you're talking about, right? And you're creating those objects. If I have just one soundbar coming from front, because I see this quite often, right? Dolby Atmos enabled soundbars in a room, and obviously they're trying to deflect off the ceiling and bounce and all that kind of stuff. How are they manipulating that sound to make it feel? Because I've had those experiences with the soundbar. They're actually decent. Like I was pretty surprised that it's coming from one source, because used to think that you need multiple speakers to create it. Right. But it's coming from one soundbar, and it's creating that spatiality. However, it is very required for me to be in one spot and one spot only. That's right. But how are they able to do that?
So they're actually taking advantage of something that you normally would want to get rid of in your room, which is reflections. So just the same way, if you think about sound as a laser, and then every hard surface around you is basically a mirror, then you can kind of start shooting sound from one side across different walls back to where you are. And so that's exactly what they do. It's just a sound bar with a bunch of speakers. Let's say you're looking at a TV. I'm the TV. How you doing? And then the sound bar is right in front of you. It's doing your, let's see here, from this perspective. Okay, so this is your left and this is your right going straight at you. But then you have your height that's shooting up and expecting there to be a hard ceiling to then shoot down at you. So that way, if you listen to it, if you're standing right above it, it's gonna sound like trash. But the fact that it's designed to lose energy over time, lose energy when it hits the room, and then sound good by the time it hits you, it's expecting that situation. That's also why if you move out of the way, then you're not gonna get it, because it's expecting to shoot down right at the center. And then the same thing, they have little speakers that are shooting off to the side, trying to shoot off of this wall and trying to shoot off of this wall, so by the time it gets to you, that it'll all converge at you right in the middle, so that way you don't have to have all these speakers around you, basically doing the same thing, shooting stuff at different times so that way converge on you at the point in time that the creator originally expected it to.
Last question around spatial audio. Do you think we have a lot of growth there, or are we stagnating in spatiality?
I think there's still more that we can do creatively. At the point of technology, I mean, you have high fidelity speakers all around you. There's not much more you can do. The most you can do is turn to ambisonics, which is basically saying there's no such thing as too many speakers. And then you start making a cage where it's basically you exist in this little hamster bubble, and every like 30 degrees there's a speaker facing you at some different direction. And ideally, if you sit there, then you can have this glorious experience of music literally engulfing you and swirling around and doing whatever. And it's supposed to be amazing, but it's very impractical. No one can build that. But at the same time, like that's the only direction. You can add more speakers and get to that same point, or you can change what is happening with those speakers. There's people like the whole spatial audio, Mix for Spatial Audio by Apple. They're doing some really cool things about making it seem like stuff is going from one spot to the other, and making it seem like there's movement happening, and there's different effects and reverbs and stuff that happen in trip out. There's some cool creative stuff that I think we're just scratching the surface on for taking full advantage of the existing system. But ultimately, the system itself is not going to change, and the experiences that you can therefore make are going to. It's the same thing that's gonna happen to spatial that happened to stereo. We reached the end of stereo of stuff we can do. Since the Beatles did Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Band. They already found out a bunch of cool things you can do with it, and then we're trying to basically chip at the very edge of it to see how much further we can get just by changing this, changing that, changing that. And then we get to the loudness war that happened back in like 2005, 2006, back when CDs were starting to get phased out, which is everyone was trying to get a little bit louder, a little bit wider, a little bit bigger, a little bit more punchy. And then we're smashing into this wall that we're relying on the brain to detangle all the stuff we're slamming together. And I think that's going to happen again to spatial, but maybe in a slightly different way, or maybe it's going to be something different. It's not going to be a loudness war, but maybe it's going to be everyone's going to try to pan everything all at the same time, and it's going to be this just like it's like listening to spaghetti. That's probably the best way I can envision that world is going to be. So it's this thing where people are going to push it to its limits, and some of it's going to be good, some of it's not going to be good, and whether or not it's got the staying power or it's worth it for someone to invest in a huge system like that just to experience that creative item, I don't know. There's all the binaural spatial audio that is promising to do something similar, which is give you the same sense of surrounding and spatiality, but just with two points in your ear. So, is it worth it to do that, or worth it to get the Dolby Atmos?
Interesting. Yeah, we'll see where it goes, but I appreciate you breaking down what is spatial audio and how it works.
There it is.
Awesome.